The flight from Auckland to Bangkok has a duration of approximately 11 hours and 50 minutes. I know this the way a man knows the commute to a second office. Not because I have memorized it, but because I have made it 9 times in 9 consecutive years, and the body has absorbed the sequence. The domestic connection to the international terminal, the check-in desk at Thai Airways, the 2 glasses of red with the meal, the specific angle I find for sleeping, the descent through morning cloud into Suvarnabhumi. I am a retired quantity surveyor from Auckland, and I have been doing this since 2015, and my wife Sandra believes I am going to play golf, and the golf is why I am recording this, because there are things that last 9 years without being examined, and things that last 9 years because they have been examined very carefully indeed, and the 2 categories are different in ways that take a long time to see. My name is Peter. I am 72. I have been married to Sandra for 44 years, and we have 2 sons, both in Auckland, and 3 grandchildren, and a house in Remuera that has been our family home since 1997. And I am a man who has, by every visible and external measure, lived the life that his generation and his profession and his suburb considered correct. I need to give you Sandra, because without Sandra this recording is only half of what it is. Sandra is 70, a former secondary school librarian, from Takapuna originally, a woman of consistent warmth and consistent schedule who has organized our household for 44 years, with the kind of quiet competence that is invisible in daily life and becomes visible only in its absence. I know this because I spent 3 weeks away from it every March, for 9 years, and I have come home to it 9 times, and the homecoming is always the same. The house in a specific and recognizable order, the fridge restocked for my return, and Sandra at the kitchen table with her coffee and her crossword, and she looks up when I come in, and she says, "How was the golf?" And I say, "Good," and she says, "Did you eat well?" And I say, "Very," and we have a cup of tea. And that is what 44 years looks like from the outside, and mostly from the inside too. She is not a naive woman. She reads widely. She has raised 2 sons and outlasted 4 different headmasters at her school, and managed my career in the background for 35 years, which is the management that enables a quantity surveyor's career, and that receives none of its credit. And she has done it with a good grace that I do not deserve, and that I have relied on entirely, and that I am, at 72, more grateful for than I was at 60, which is either wisdom or guilt, and I have not been able to separate the 2. We have been happy. I want to say that before I say anything else, and I want to mean it, which I do. The 44 years have contained real things, real warmth, a real shared life, the raising of 2 actual men who are better than their parents in the ways that matter, the specific comfort of a person who knows how you take your coffee, and has known for 40 years, and has never made it wrong, and will not make it wrong tomorrow. I am not a man who married the wrong woman. I am a man who, at 63, in a coffee shop in Hua Hin, met the right one, and the 2 sentences are both true, and they do not resolve each other, and this recording is the space between them. My name is Peter. I am 72. Because the word pillar belongs to other kinds of stories than the one I am telling. What I will say is that I have been recognizable, for 44 years, as the kind of man I have been, and that the man I have been is genuine. I want to say that first and clearly, and that the man I am in Hua Hin for 3 weeks every March is also genuine, and that the difficulty of this recording is that I have spent 9 years sustaining the proposition that both of those statements are simultaneously true, and that I no longer know whether the sustaining is intelligence or cowardice or something that does not have a clean name yet. I should say what Hua Hin is to me before I say what it is, because the order matters. Let me tell you about what March felt like in year 1, because year 1 is different from what followed, and the difference matters for understanding how something that was not a plan became a plan. I went to Hua Hin in March 2015 with no architecture. There was no Golf Story infrastructure, no timing selected to coincide with Sandra's bridge club, no 7-component system. There was a man who was depleted by a long project, who had been told about a quiet Thai beach town, who had booked 3 weeks without telling Sandra why he was going to Hua Hin specifically, and who had said instead that he was going to Thailand for some rest, and perhaps some golf. The first version of the cover was vague because there was nothing to cover. By day 4 there was something to cover. By the end of the first March, there was a woman I had met in a coffee shop on the 4th day, and spoken to for 4 subsequent evenings, and who I was thinking about on the plane back to Auckland, and who I had not mentioned to Sandra when I described the trip as exactly what the doctor ordered, which was also true. The architecture was built in year 2, when I knew I was going back, and when I understood that knowing I was going back required the architecture to exist. By year 3, it was load-bearing. By year 9, it is structural. I am a quantity surveyor. I know what structural means. What it means is, you cannot remove it without the thing falling down. I should say what Hua Hin is to me, before I say what it is, for what I told Sandra, and what I believed at the time, was a recovery trip after a project in Singapore that had run for 14 months and had ended in the way that long projects end, which is with a specific depletion that is not the same as tiredness and that requires something outside the ordinary schedule of rest to address. A colleague had recommended Hua Hin, quieter than Bangkok, more Thai than Phuket, a place with a beach and some good restaurants and the pace of a city that has stopped trying to impress anyone. I went for 3 weeks. I had chosen it also because it was not anywhere Sandra would think to accompany me, not because I was planning anything, but because I was exhausted in the way that exhausted people are when they do not know how to be exhausted among people who need them to be fine. And Hua Hin was a place where nobody needed me to be anything. That was the whole of the plan in January 2015. I arrived in February, I played golf on the 2nd day, and by the 4th day, everything had changed without my permission. On the 3rd day I played golf, which is accurate, and which is the load-bearing fact of the cover story, because I played golf again on the 6th day and on the 10th, and I have photographs of each occasion on my phone, in an album I would not mind Sandra seeing, and in this way, the golf story is not a lie. It is a frame into which I have placed less than half of what happened. On the 4th day I met Duang, at a coffee place near the night market. She was sitting across the room with a book, and she looked up when I came in, and looked back at her book, and I ordered coffee, and I was aware of her in the way that I am, at 63 in 2015, aware of very few things outside the scope of a quantity surveyor's habitual attention, and I want to say plainly what that awareness was and was not. It was not desire in the first instance. It was the recognition of a woman who was entirely at ease in her own presence, reading her book in a coffee shop in the way that a person who does not need to be seen reads a book. And that ease was the thing I noticed, because I had spent 14 months on a construction project in Singapore in which nothing and no one was at ease, and the ease was, in that moment, remarkable. We spoke when she asked the staff something in Thai, and the staff did not understand, and I was at the next table, and I worked out what she was asking, and told the staff, and she thanked me, and we talked for about an hour, and I went back to the hotel. The next morning I went back to the coffee place, and she was there again, and I have thought about that second morning many times since, because it was the first voluntary act in a sequence that now contains 9 years of march, and I made it deliberately, and I knew what I was doing, and I did it. Duang is 52 now. I want to give you her life as it actually is, because double life stories have a tendency to make the Thailand woman into a passive element of the architecture, and she is not passive, and she is not an element. She runs a business. The textile business has grown across the 9 marches I have known it. She had 2 or 3 regular buyers in 2015, and she has 23 now, across Hua Hin and Bangkok, and 2 boutique hotels in Prachuap that carry her fabric as a design feature. She negotiates her own contracts, manages her own inventory, handles her own accounts. When the son had a vehicle problem in 2019 and I offered to help, she said thank you and accepted it, and she also immediately began paying me back in the form of a monthly deduction from the amount she would have asked for at the next Songkran if things had been different, which she did not tell me she was doing, but which I calculated from the pattern of the requests that did not arrive. She is a woman who does not want to owe. I find this, 9 years in, one of the most important things I know about her, and it would be invisible if I had not been paying the kind of attention that a man pays when the attention is a form of love. The son I like. He is 24 now and taller than either of us, and works at a hotel in Phuket, and sends Duang photographs of the sea from his days off. And she shows me the photographs, and we look at them together, and it is, in those moments, a family scene of a specific kind. And I am aware of that, and I stay in it because it is genuine. Duang is 52 now. She is from Nakhon Si Thammarat originally. She has been in Hua Hin since 2008. She runs a small textile business selling hand-woven fabric at markets, and to a set of regular customers who have grown with her across 17 years. She was divorced in 2006 from a Thai man, one son who is now 24, and works in Phuket. She lives in a house that she rents, and that she has made into what I can only describe as the most specific expression of personality I have encountered in a domestic space. Not expensive, not remarkable to any visitor who did not know her, but entirely and precisely hers. In the arrangement of the cloth samples and the plants, and the particular things on the shelves. I know the house well. I have stayed there in the last 6 of the 9 years, moving from the hotel I used in the first 3, because staying in the hotel had started to feel like an impermanence that neither of us believed in any longer. I want to stay on Duang properly before I go to the architecture, because the architecture only makes sense in the light of Duang. She is one of the most straightforwardly intelligent people I have known, and I have known many people across a career that required intelligence to navigate and that gave me a reasonable sample for comparison. Her English is strong, better than she claims, because she is a woman who understates her capabilities as a matter of professional habit. She has found, across 17 years of selling hand-woven cloth to buyers who include foreigners with opinions about Thai craft, that understanding more than you reveal is an advantage in negotiation, and the habit has become the register. She does not perform warmth. She is warm, at a temperature that you notice only in contrast to the absence of performance, which is a contrast that becomes clearer every year I am older and have less patience for the performed variety. She has opinions about politics, about architecture, about the quality of the coffee in different Hua Hin shops, about her own government, about her son, and she states them with the directness of someone who has decided that the time available to her for tactful vagueness is finite, and that she prefers to use it for other things. I find her, at 52 as at 43 in 2015, the most interesting person in the room of any room she is in. She knows I am married. She has known since the 2nd year, when I told her, because the 1st year I did not tell her, and I was not comfortable with the not telling in the way that a man who has spent 44 years as a recognizably honest person is not comfortable with concealment, which is clumsily and with effort, and with a specific feeling in the chest that is not guilt exactly, but is the sensation of carrying extra weight. Let me give you the quantity surveying career, because it is relevant in ways that are not immediately obvious. A quantity surveyor is, in essence, a man who measures things. I spent 35 years measuring the cost of construction, the materials, the labor, the time, the risk, and producing estimates that others use to make decisions. And I was good at this because I have a mind that is oriented toward precision, and because I learned early that the gap between what something costs and what it appears to cost is where projects fail, and I spent my career closing that gap. This skill, the ability to see what something actually costs, rather than what it appears to, is not transferable to emotional life in the way you might hope. I have spent 9 years knowing precisely what this architecture costs in money and in the specific tension of the phone call on the terrace and the January 2018 kitchen moment, and having that knowledge has not made the decision easier or the architecture less complicated. It has only made me more specific about describing the complication, which is perhaps the reason I am recording this at all. A man who measures things cannot stop measuring. And what the measuring tells me now, at 72, is that the two debts, the debt to Sandra and the debt to the truth, have been accruing for 9 years. And I have been servicing the interest without touching the principal, and I am aware, with professional precision, of where that trajectory leads. She knows I am married. In the second year I told her, and she absorbed the information with the stillness of someone who has not been surprised, but who has been waiting for the confirmation to arrive so that she could arrange her expectations correctly. She said, "And you will keep coming in March." I said, "Yes," she said. "Then March is what we have." And she picked up her tea, and we talked about something else, and the arrangement has been that arrangement. Precise, unsentimentalized, maintained by both of us without a great deal of discussion. For 8 years. I do not know whether Duang loves me. I have not asked, because the asking would require a conversation about what the answer means for both of us, and both of us have made an arrangement that does not include that conversation. And I respect the arrangement because she made it with full information, and I made it with full information, and the full information includes the fact that I have a wife in Auckland and a life in Remuera, and a March flight that I will take, and a macadamia chocolate at the duty-free on the way back. And she knows all of this, and she has chosen March, and her choosing of March with that full information is the clearest expression of agency I have encountered in another person in 9 years. I know that she is glad when I arrive, and that she is not bereft when I leave, and that in between she is fully present in the way that only people who have made a clear-eyed decision about what something is can be present, and I find this more sustaining than most things I know. There is a word for it in Thai that she used once, and that I did not understand, and that she translated as approximately the piece of a thing that is what it is, which is the most precise description of March that I have encountered in 9 years of trying to describe it to myself. The architecture. 9 years, 7 components, each of which I want to give you precisely because the precision is the record, and the record is the only honest thing I can produce from a situation that has not been honest. I should add, between the 7 components, the things that are not in the architecture, but that the architecture depends on, because a quantity surveyor knows that the supporting structure is as important as the load-bearing one. Supporting structure 1. Sandra's incuriosity about golf, which is real and is not engineered. She has never played and has no interest in playing, and finds the game abstract in the way that sports are abstract to people who have never felt the specific pleasure they offer. And her incuriosity means that when I describe a round in detail, and I do describe rounds in detail because the detail is the authenticity and the authenticity is the architecture, she receives it with the warmth of a person listening to a subject they do not understand and are glad someone they love understands. Supporting structure 2. My history of independent travel. I have been traveling for work since 1988, and it was never a point of friction, and the retirement trip to Hua Hin was established in year 1 as a recovery trip, and in year 2 as a pattern, and in year 3 as a tradition, and traditions in a long marriage are invisible once they are established, because they become part of the furniture of the year, and nobody examines the furniture. Supporting structure 3. The family network. Sandra has her own full life in Auckland. The bridge club, her friendships from the school, the grandchildren, the involvement in the Remuera community garden that she joined in 2019, and March is a month in which she is busy and occupied, and not sitting at home noting my absence. This is not a coincidence from year 3 onward. I selected the timing. The bridge club regionals are in March, because bridge clubs have regional competitions in March, and I found this out in year 2 by asking Sandra about her schedule, and noting what I found, and the noting was a professional reflex, and the use of the note was a different kind of thing, and I want to be precise about the difference. A quantity surveyor selects March because the data tells him March works. That is the man, and the man is the architecture, and the architecture has been running for 9 years. The architecture. 9 years, 7 components. I play golf in Hua Hin, because I play golf in Auckland, and because a man who plays golf in his home country going to a golf destination is the most unremarkable configuration available. Hua Hin has 7 or 8 courses of varying quality, and I have played most of them, and the photographs on my phone are real, and when Sandra asks about the courses, I can answer with the specificity of a man who has been there, because I have been there, and the answer and the specificity are true, and the truth of the answer is the foundation on which the architecture rests. Component 2. The timing. March is a month when Sandra's Bridge Club has its regional competition, which keeps her occupied and which she enjoys more than she would enjoy 3 weeks in Hua Hin, which I know because in year 3 she said as much, unprompted, in a way that I registered as both relief and mild shame. Component 3. The phone. I call Sandra every second day, in the evenings, from Hua Hin, and I am at Duang's house when I call, and I step onto the terrace, which has a view of the garden, and the calls are warm and detailed, and I tell Sandra about the golf and about the places I have eaten and about the weather, all of which are accurate, and I tell her nothing that is not accurate, and I omit the existence of a person without whose existence the March trip would not occur. Component 4. The budget. I budget the March trip as a golf holiday, which has a cost structure that Sandra has no reason to question, because the cost structure of a golf holiday to Thailand for 3 weeks is well documented and consistent, and I have produced it consistently across 9 years. The actual cost is somewhat higher because Duang's son needed help with a vehicle in 2019, and her roof needed work in 2022, and I paid for both without discussing either with anyone, because neither was large enough to require a discussion, and both were things that I had the money for and wanted to do. Component 5. The return. I come back on the same date every year, a Tuesday in the last week of March, and I bring macadamia chocolates from duty-free, which I began doing in year 2 as a habit, and which I cannot stop without explaining the stopping. Year 4 was the year I have thought about most since. Sandra booked flights. The 5 years after year 4 are the years that are hardest to account for, because they are the years where nothing happened. No near miss, no revelation, no crisis. And the nothing happening is what I am examining. In year 5 I went back in March, and Duang had redecorated the back room of the house with some fabric she had found at a Nakon Sea Thammarat supplier. And the fabric was the specific burnt orange shade of late afternoon light. And I sat in that room for the first hour after arriving and thought, this is a room that did not exist until it existed, and it exists because Duang made it, and I am in it, and the next 3 weeks will be the best 3 weeks of the next 12 months. In year 6, Sandra's Bridge Club won their regional, and she was in excellent spirits for the whole of March, and when I came home, she showed me the trophy, and I said that was wonderful, which it was, and the conversation covered my entire absence, and the entirety of March, the 7 rounds of golf, the textile market on Thursday mornings, the evening walks along the waterfront. The room with the burnt orange fabric existed inside the cover point of Sandra's bridge trophy, and I stood in the kitchen looking at the trophy and feeling, precisely and simultaneously, pride in my wife and the specific bewilderment of a man who has been living 2 lives for 6 years and who has found both of them worth living, and who has no idea what to do with that. Years 7 and 8 were structurally identical. The preparation in January, the flight in March, the 3 weeks that are the best 3 weeks of the year, the return with the macadamia chocolates, the cup of tea, the how was the golf. I want to say something about the macadamia chocolates, because they are a small thing that has become, across 9 years, a weight-bearing detail. They are the same brand every year. Sandra likes them. I buy them at the Auckland duty-free after I land and before the customs hall, and she knows I will bring them, and the bringing of them and the knowing I will bring them and the consistency across 9 years is the kind of thing that constitutes trust, and the using of it to sustain an architecture is the thing I am least comfortable with in this recording, and I am going to say so now because I have been circling it since the beginning. Year 4 was the year I have thought about most since. Sandra booked flights, not to Hua Hin, she booked to Bangkok for a week, to overlap with the last week of my trip and to add on to her sister's visit in Singapore. She told me in January, pleased with herself, having sorted the connections, and I sat in the kitchen in Remuera in January 2018 and understood what was being offered, which was the discovery that my wife wanted to join my life. I manufactured a work crisis. I was still taking on occasional consulting work at that point, and I called my former business partner in Auckland and asked whether he could produce a crisis that would require my return for the relevant dates, and he produced one, with good grace, and without asking questions that I had not prepared answers for. Sandra canceled her flights. She was disappointed. She is not a woman who shows disappointment demonstratively, which is a quality I have relied on for 44 years, and that in January 2018 produced in me a feeling I am going to describe as accurately as I can, which was this: the relief of the crisis managed, simultaneous with the understanding that I had just prevented my wife from accompanying me somewhere I had not intended to go alone, and that the preventing had required me to ask another man to lie on my behalf, and that both of those things were something other than the kind of man I had believed I was. That is the near miss, and that is its cost, and I have carried it since, and it sits at the bottom of the 9 marches like ballast, and it is what this recording is. I have not told Sandra. I am not going to tell her, and I want to say that explicitly because the men who make these recordings usually end them with a plan for honesty, and I do not have one, and the absence of the plan is the honest part of this account. I should tell you about my older son David before I finish, because David is 43, in Christchurch, an accountant, and David is the son who is most like me, which means he is the son who will understand this best, and the son from whom it will cost the most when it comes out, as it will come out, because things like this come out. He and I speak monthly, approximately, and the conversations are efficient and warm, and include the grandchildren and the All Blacks, and his wife's growing business, and his thoughts about property, and they do not include anything that either of us would describe as an interior life, because we are Remuera men of our respective generations, and we manage interior lives by not identifying them as such. He has no reason to suspect anything about March. He has been told the golf story by his mother, and he accepts it with the incurious acceptance of a man whose father plays golf and goes to Hua Hin. If he ever asks me about the courses, I can tell him about the Blue Canyon at 6 in the morning and the specific quality of the Hua Hin light on the fairways, and I can do this with genuine pleasure because both of those things are true and beautiful, and I want to record that, because this recording has required me to be honest about the dishonesty, and I want to also be honest about the fact that Hua Hin in March is the best 3 weeks of my year, and the golf is part of why, and that part I am not performing. I want to add one more thing about the Hua Hin morning, because I have described the coffee place and the book and the looking up, and I have not described the light, and the light is the thing that the architecture is actually sustaining access to. Hua Hin in March at 6 in the morning has a quality of light that is specific to the Gulf of Thailand at that latitude in that season. A warm horizontal light that comes in low across the water, and that makes the bougainvillea on the street near Duang's house the color of something that is not available in Auckland in any month. And that makes the fairways at the Banyan the green I have been describing to Sandra for 9 years, and that I cannot describe to her without describing everything else, and so I describe it in the form of a golf report, and the golf report is true, and the light is in the golf report, and the light is also in the coffee shop on the 4th morning, and it is the thing I am flying 11 hours and 50 minutes toward, and I am 72, and March 3rd is booked, and I am getting on the plane. I have not told Sandra. What I have instead is a question that I have been unable to answer across 9 years, which is, what would the telling produce? I want to give that question the full treatment it deserves, because I have seen it dismissed in other accounts as the obvious cowardice of a man who wants to have everything and pay for nothing. 9 years of a quantity surveyor's precision should produce an answer, if anything should. The telling would produce, first, Sandra knowing. I want to be specific about what Sandra knowing would mean for a woman of 70 who has organized her life around the confidence of her marriage. It would mean that the 44 years are restructured retroactively, not destroyed, because 44 years cannot be destroyed by 3 weeks a year, but restructured, so that every March from 2015 onward becomes a March in which she did not know, which is not the same as the March she lived, and the not sameness is what I cannot give her. The telling would produce, second, a calculation on her part about what to do, which she would perform accurately and without drama, because she is that kind of woman, and the outputs of the calculation might include leaving, and might include staying, and might include something in between, and all three outputs contain a rearrangement of the last years of her life that she has not chosen and that I would have forced upon her in exchange for the relief of my own honesty. The relief of my own honesty is not, I have decided, sufficient compensation for that rearrangement. The calculation produces a devastation for which there is no remaining time to recover, and whether my refusal to produce it is cowardice or care is the question I sit with, and I have not resolved it. And it is the question this recording is really about, which I knew when I started recording, and which I want to name now that I am near the end of it. My youngest son Liam rang in November and asked, in the specific way that adult children ask questions they have been holding for some time, whether I was happy. He is 41, a civil engineer, not given to that category of question, and the question landed in the pause between two other subjects in a way that told me he had been managing it across the conversation and had finally decided to put it down. I said yes. He said he was glad. He said he had been thinking about what it would be like to retire, and whether he would know what to do with himself, and the question, I understood now, was about him rather than about me, and I said that retirement was, in my experience, the art of filling the structure left by the absence of work, and that some people fill it better than others, and that the important thing was to find the things that gave you the sense that the day had been worth being in. He said that made sense. We talked about his children for a while. I did not say that my March structure is provided by an 11-hour flight and a woman in Hua Hin who reads books in coffee shops and understates her intelligence and knows exactly what I am and has decided that March is enough. Let me tell you what the knowledge costs, because this recording has described the architecture precisely and has not yet described the maintenance cost, which is different from the financial cost and the near-miss cost, and which is the true running expense. The maintenance cost is the specific quality of attention that a sustained concealment requires. I am attentive to Sandra in ways she reads as love, which they are, and that are also the attentiveness of a man who is continuously monitoring for the moment when something he has said produces a question he is not prepared for. In 44 years I have not had to monitor Sandra in this way, because there was no monitoring required, and the monitoring since 2015 is not heavy. It is light, professional, the weight of a project risk you have assessed as low and check regularly, but it is continuous, and continuous attentiveness has a quality different from the natural attentiveness of love, and I am aware of the difference, and I wonder sometimes whether Sandra is aware of it, and I conclude she probably is not, because Sandra is not monitoring me, and that asymmetry is what costs most, and what I am accountable for, and what is in the calendar under March 3rd. I am looking at the calendar on my study wall, which is a month-by-month calendar that I have maintained in the same format since 1996. I want to give you the January preparation because it has a specific texture and because it is the part of the 9 Marches that Sandra is most present in without knowing it. In January I book the flights. I book them from a browser in incognito mode, which I started doing in year 5 when it occurred to me that the browser history is a form of documentation, and I have been a man who documents things for 35 years, and I understood immediately what browser history in a shared household means. I book the golf on the same day, and the golf bookings are in my regular email because they are the visible part of the trip, and Sandra sometimes asks to see the confirmation. I make a list in my notebook, a physical notebook that I keep in the study, of the things I need to do before March. Arrange for the garden to be looked after, confirm with Sandra's sister whether she is available to stay for the first week, tell the boys I am going. The telling of the boys is the part that has changed most across 9 years. In year 1, I mentioned it in passing. In year 4, I mentioned it to David over the phone, and he said, "Good for you, mate," which is high praise from an accountant from Christchurch. In year 9, I mention it with the same ease, and it requires no management, because 9 years of the same march has made the march unremarkable, and unremarkable is what the architecture depends on. By January, I have usually spoken to Duang about when I am arriving. She does not wait for me in the sense of holding the month for me. She has her own life in Hua Hin across all 12 months, and my arrival is one of the things her march contains rather than the thing her march is, which is a distinction I respect. And she will know the dates, and we will know, between us, what the first days contain. The coffee place on the 4th morning, the book, the looking up. These things are not arranged. They are what happens. I am looking at the calendar on my study wall. March 3rd, connecting through Sydney. The duration is approximately 11 hours and 50 minutes. The golf is booked. 3rd day and 7th day, the Blue Canyon course and the Banyan, which I have played before and which I can describe with genuine pleasure, because the Banyan's fairways in the early morning are the specific green that Hua Hin produces, and that I have been seeing for 9 years, and that I still want to see. Duang will be at the coffee place on the 4th morning. She will have her book. She will look up when I come in, and then she will look back at the book, and I will order coffee, and we will talk, and the march will be what March has always been, which is the 1 month in the year when I am entirely the man I actually am, without the 44 years of the recognizable version, and I do not know whether that sentence is a defense or a confession, and I have decided it is both, and I am getting on the plane. Let me finish with what I would tell a man who is where I was in year 2, when the architecture was still being constructed, and when the options were more numerous than they are now. I would tell him, the architecture you are building is load-bearing by year 3, and by year 9 you cannot remove it without the thing falling down. And the thing that falls down is not just your secret, it is the 44 years that your secret has been leaning against. If you are going to go to Hua Hin every March, go openly or do not go. The third option, which is my option, which I chose at 64 with the precision of a quantity surveyor who has miscalculated one of the inputs and is hoping the structure holds, is a structure, and structures require maintenance, and the maintenance is the continuous attentiveness I have described, and the attentiveness is what you pay every year, and what you pay is not money, and you cannot put it on a spreadsheet, and I could not have told you that in year 2, and I can tell you clearly now. I am telling you now. Whether you hear it is the part that is yours and not mine. The flight is 11 hours and 50 minutes. I know this the way a man knows the commute to a second office. On March 3rd, I will sit in the Thai Airways seat I always book, aisle, right side, 8 rows from the front. And I will have 2 glasses of red with the meal, and I will find the sleeping angle, and I will land at Suvarnabhumi in the Bangkok morning. And I will collect my bag and take the shuttle to the domestic terminal for the Hua Hin connection. And I will be in Hua Hin before noon, and in the afternoon I will unpack in Duang's house in the room with the burnt orange fabric, and then I will walk down to the waterfront and along it for an hour, and then I will come back and she will have made something for dinner, and we will eat it, and it will be March. I have done this 9 times. I am going to do it again. The calendar says March 3rd, and the calendar does not lie, which is, I understand, the most ironic sentence in this recording, and I offer it anyway, because a quantity surveyor always offers the precise measurement, even when the measurement is of himself.